President and CEO here at the Cabinet, and I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight for this very important topic. If you have some folks maybe who couldn't make it out tonight for whatever reason, we have BevCam in the back who will be streaming this right now, but it'll also be available on their YouTube channel, on BevCam's YouTube channel. So please, after tonight, share this with everybody. This is a very important conversation that we're having, and it needs to be heard by as many people as possible. We are thrilled to be partnering with Leading Ladies to bring this to you tonight. And now I'd like to introduce Therese Melton. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces and some new ones here tonight. Judy and I, the co-directors of Leading Ladies, are thrilled to again be presenting a community conversation with the Cabinet. Tonight's topic couldn't be more relevant or timely. We're living in a time when the rights of too many are being discarded. We need to understand what our rights are, how to defend them, and how to help others in our communities whose rights are being challenged. Our panel is ready to help us understand the problems and develop ways to combat them. After they speak, everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions. Now let me introduce our moderator. Can you all come out, please? Our moderator, Trish Moore. Trish is president of the Women's Fund, has served in executive positions in healthcare, government, nonprofit, and for-profit organizations. She specializes in executive coaching and leadership development. Please welcome Trish Moore.
My turn now. Can you hear me okay back there? I can't see you all that well. I've been accused of having too soft of a voice, so please let me know. Not when I'm yelling, of course, but anyway. I'm very happy to be here and welcome all of you. And I just want to briefly introduce our panelists and then let them go for it. Marion Albert was one of the first lawyers to get on to Martha's Vineyard when that plane load of refugees arrived on the island, courtesy of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. She is co-counsel in the lawsuit against the governor and is involved in litigation challenging new federal immigration policies in the community. She has, through her work and her life, championed the rights of Latinas and other women of color. And she holds a JD from the City University of New York Law School. Next is Laura Rotolo, who's the Senior Advocacy Director for Field Initiatives, long title there, Laura, of the ACLU of Massachusetts. She's worked there for over 15 years and manages the field operations, mobilizing voters, coordinating rallies, which I think some of us in this room will be very interested in hearing about, and generally educating the public about their rights. Laura holds a JD from the American University and a master's from Tufts Fletcher School. Elsabelle Rincon is founder and executive director of the Welcome Immigrant Network. I love that name, Welcome the Immigrant. Laura's passion for supporting immigrants has led her to work with several nonprofits on the North Shore in support and advocacy for immigrants. In her work life, I think she follows that same passion. She's the business development lending officer for Nectar Community Investments. And Nectar, through their financial advice and loans and strategic advice, helps build household stability and expand opportunities for people and places that are often overlooked by traditional finance. Elsabelle has a Master of Education in Community Engagement and is a PhD candidate, still a candidate, at UMass Lowell in International and Global Studies with, guess what, an emphasis on migration and human rights. So the format, as I think you know, is we're going to ask each of our panelists to speak for a few minutes about what she is involved in, and we will then open the floor for questions and discussions. And I think I'll just leave it at that. I think it's good. This is a community conversation, so it's good to remember some community values, which, of course, include respect. And I think that having a respectful dialogue is the order of the day when we see so much outside of us that's not particularly respectful, right? So take it away, Mary. Mary.
Thank you. All right, so hi everyone. Like Trish said, my name is Mary Albert, and I am a senior attorney at Lawyers for Civil Rights. For those who are not familiar with Lawyers for Civil Rights, we're a nonprofit that provides free legal support to communities of color, immigrants, and low-income individuals. We do both litigation, and we also have a section of our team that works on corporate law or with small businesses. It's called BizGrow, and we help small businesses open their business and with whatever other legal issues that may come up in regards to their business. And so, yeah, I'm very excited to be here, and I think that the title of this conversation is very appropriate, The Rights We Have and the Knowledge We Need. This is a very appropriate title for this conversation because it really highlights a reality that I think oftentimes is neglected, and that's the fact that rights are only real when people know them and understand them and are able to exercise those rights. And so, we'll get to unpack all of that in this conversation, and I'm really excited to hear from my co-panelists as well. But before we do get into that, I also do want to do some table setting, kind of going along with the concept of respect. And especially when we talk about immigration, I think that language is very important. And, we want to make sure that the language we use is, empowering people and communities and not disempowering people, right? And so in the immigration context, a term that's often thrown around, used very casually and often is illegal, right? And I want to address that because obviously we see it all the time from a lot of individuals, a lot of politicians even, and elected officials. And so, there's many reasons why that term is inappropriate. One, it's inaccurate, right? It's not very precise, but also it's deeply dehumanizing. And for that reason, we should commit ourselves to using language that recognizes everyone's worth and character. And again, when we're talking about immigration status, a more accurate term to use is undocumented or non-citizen, or if we're being more specific about an individual's immigration status, you might say TPS holder or parolee or other terms, right? But the point is, we want to make sure that we're committed to that type of language during this discussion. So now I'll kind of open the discussion to the larger context, what we're seeing across the nation. And as I'm sure most of you are very familiar with, we've seen a huge surge in immigration enforcement. I think that the numbers kind of change because it keeps increasing, but I recently saw a report from UCLA that said that arrests in the first 100 days of Donald Trump's administration, arrests were up by like 500% or something like that. And I think that might change depending on the state and the municipality, but this is true across the board. We're seeing a huge surge in immigration enforcement, and not just that, what we're also seeing is an increase in violence and excessive force when it comes to implementing this immigration enforcement. And so, obviously for allies and for, immigrant communities, we want to make sure that people know their rights. And so some of those rights, I'm sure that many of you are already familiar with. And I told Trish that I wanted to make this a little bit more engaging, so I'm going to open it up to the audience. But I'll start by saying that the Constitution does guarantee certain rights to everyone. It doesn't matter if someone is undocumented, if someone is a citizen, there are certain protections that are extended to individuals no matter what. So for example, one of those being protections against unlawful searches and seizures, right? And so what does this mean? What rights are implicated? Could I maybe get some hands and maybe someone share a right that they think is implicated by that? And if I don't get no volunteers, then I can also just go on and say them. But I'll give you.
Stops for no reason?
Sorry, can you say that?
Traffic stops for no reason?
Right, now there should be some a reasonable cause for the stop, right? Yes, exactly. How about, yes, go ahead.
I believe that a person cannot be detained, or I'm going to say disappeared, by ICE without a signed judicial warrant. Is that correct?
So individuals have a right to refuse the search, right? Either of their person, of their property, of a home, of their business, if there's no judicial warrant. That's right? What are some of the things, now that you mentioned judicial warrant, what are some of the things that you should look for on a judicial warrant?
Date.
The date, you want to make sure that the date is accurate, right? And certain warrants will include a time period where the warrant will still be valid, but it's very important that individuals check the date, yes? Address, you want to make sure that the address is correct? A judge's signature, exactly. Going along with the address, you want to make sure that the individual indicated is the correct person, right? Going along with the judge's signature, you want to make sure that it's on a court letterhead usually is what we say, right? It should either come from a state court or federal court, right? But that's what makes it a judicial warrant, that it comes from the court and that it's signed by a judge, that it has the right date, it has the right address, the right name, and if they're there to search a location, it could be that the warrant also indicates what officers are allowed to search, right? And so you also want to make sure that you check that, right? It could be that law enforcement comes to a business and has authority to search documents, but that doesn't mean it gives them authority to search every room and talk to everyone in that property. And so again, if you don't know that, you're giving law enforcement permission to go beyond what the judicial warrant allows them to do. And so these are small little things that when Lawyers for Civil Rights, and I'm sure same with some of the other organizations that we'll hear from today, that we're highlighting for people because they're small details but very important and make a huge difference. And we've heard from community members who have shared how they have asserted these rights, right? They're like, let me see a warrant, and they're checking the warrant and things like that. And when they do that, immigration officials have sometimes left, right? Now, there's also many instances where we're seeing that that's not the case. And so I think that is the most alarming part, right? That people are being educated about their rights, they're learning about them, and oftentimes they are asserting them. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it might be that immigration officials are not following the law and are violating people's rights anyway. And so at Lawyers for Civil Rights, what we're seeing is that we're hearing from family members or from immigrant families how this is impacting them. And so I wanted to talk about 3 specific cases that I've worked on in particular. One of them deals with a Chelsea family. You might have also seen this in the news. This family was driving to church on Mother's Day. 5 family members. It's the wife, the husband, and the 3 children in the back. The children are all between the ages of like 5 and maybe 15. And so you can picture that this family, following their family tradition to go to church on Mother's Day, 2 blocks from when they left their house, they're surrounded by unmarked vehicles. They're approached by officers, not sure from what organization or what agency, because they're not identifying themselves. Even when asked, why are we being stopped? What are you from DHS? Are you from ICE? Are you, the wife was trying to get more details as to why they were stopped. No information was given. What they were interested in was her husband, because her husband doesn't have status. But she is a U.S. citizen, and so for that reason, that morning, she was the one who chose to drive the car while they were going to church. Now, that situation within minutes escalated, and the next thing we know is that officers break the car window, they pull out her husband, throw him on the ground, put their knees on his back, and immediately detained him, take him away without giving any explanation as to why he was detained, where he was being taken, and again, even who they were, really. And so, again, this family did try to assert their rights, right? The wife knew that she had a right to know who they were. She had a right to know why they were being stopped. As the passenger, he didn't have to say anything, right? Her husband stayed silent the whole time. And even then, this horrible incident happened to them. This was an extremely traumatizing experience for the children, who again were in the back seat. The glass was broken, and the glass flew across the whole car, and so it did reach some of the kids, or at least in the back seat. And now these children have a deep fear for law enforcement, even though this was an interaction that lasted maybe 5 minutes. These children now, every time they see a police officer or anyone that looks like a police officer, is afraid that they're going to take their mom. And so they are having nightmares, and you're not, it's impacting their ability to focus at school. So deep and huge impact in their life. And so again, it's important to know your rights, and people are asserting them, but what happens next, right? Well, what this family did is that they stood up, they said this was not okay, and now we're helping them and representing them, and we're bringing a case to hold the ICE officers accountable for the unlawful conduct that occurred. So that's one case. And another case that I wanted to point out is a family from East Boston. So my client in this case, he was, regular day at work. He left. He's a landscaper, so he drives the company truck. He has 2 coworkers with him, and any regular day, they stop at a stoplight. For whatever reason, they're stopped. And I say for whatever reason, but I think I know the reason. It was that they saw 3 brown men in a landscaping truck, and they stopped them. I stopped them. My client asked the officer, "Why am I being stopped?" No response was given. The first thing the officer said is, "Where are you from? Where were you born?" My client said, "El Salvador, but I have TPS." So for those not familiar with TPS, or temporary protected status, is humanitarian protection that gives people work authorization, but also protects them from deportation. And so my client informed the officer of this, and even though he was trying to take out his work permit and take out a social security number card to show that he had legal protections, this officer didn't care. He said, "If you're not born here, you don't have any rights." And he said, "Get out of the car." And the same thing happened to his coworkers. And so this, I think, was horrifying. One, because again, my client had legal status, or he has legal protections. He shouldn't have been put in that situation. But he complied. He did exactly as the officers did, because he's seen the news. He's seen what happens when, when there's any type of questioning between the ICE officer and community members, and he did not want it to escalate to violence, so he just followed through. And so what resulted was that he was detained in Burlington, which is the field office for ICE. And for context, the Burlington field office is more of an administrative building, not a long-term detention center. It's maybe used for short-term detention when they're transferring people maybe from places to place, but it's not a center that's meant to hold people for more than a couple hours. When my client was put in this center, he was in a cell with 40 to 60 people at a time. He wasn't being fed appropriately, wasn't getting water he got water, but it wasn't, there wasn't any systematic form of caring for people who were being held there. He asked to speak to his attorney, he asked to speak to his wife. It took a really long time before he was able to do that. And the only reason that he was able to be released from this facility was because community members, his wife, is a part of an organization called Centro Presente, which is based out of East Boston. And due to their organizing and the pressure that was being put on the facility, our client was able to be released after 2 days. But this is, again, this is extremely alarming. This is an individual who had protections. There should have been in no circumstance should he have been put in a detention center or in any holding cell or anything, right? I mean, he has protections exactly to protect him from this type of situation.
Thanks, Marian.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
No, it's okay. These are three very passionate women whose passion and work intersect. Go ahead, Laura Rotolo.
Thank you. That was amazing. I didn't want to stop you from speaking. Definitely want to hear more in the Q&A. The work that LCR is doing is just absolutely astounding. So once again, I'm Laura Rotolo. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so thrilled to meet your beautiful space. I'd never been here before, though I just learned that this theater was built the same year that the ACLU was founded, 1920. So we are all 105 years old. This is a first for me, though. I've never spoken in a place where people are munching on popcorn. I kind of love it. This is great. Thank you again for the invitation. I think this topic could not be more timely. And I want to hear from all of you what your thoughts are, because I'm so curious to hear, how all this stuff, or those of us who are like in the weeds, how it all lands. And so to pull back a little bit, I want to sort of talk about how we got here, and what we can do about it. If you recall, before 9/11, there was no such thing as the Department of Homeland Security, right? This is a creature of post 9/11 United States policy. Before, we had something called INS, the Immigration and Nationalization Service. It was a service. You would get your visas. Yes, they deported some people, but it wasn't a huge law enforcement agency. Fast forward to today, Congress has just given ICE, which is the law enforcement part of DHS, $170 billion for deportation. This is unprecedented. It is larger, it is more money than any other law enforcement agency in the country. It is more money than every military in the world other than China and the United States. So ICE has more money than most countries have for their military. This is a deliberate pattern, right? Trump ran on deporting 1 million people every year. They have goals and they have quotas of 3,000 immigration arrests a day. Immigration arrests in Massachusetts are up 336% since January. And this is a very clear goal of what the campaign was all about, what this presidency is all about. It's about deporting as many people as possible. And how do they do that? Well, the $170 billion certainly helps. And they're also really relying on states, cities, towns, counties, government to help, to be what they call force multipliers. And so we are seeing around the country, cities and states either be coerced or enticed into giving up their own resources, their own officers, their own money to be part of this deportation force. And it is something that we're trying to stop here in Massachusetts. We can get into that a little bit more. We have more information in the back about some bills that are pending in the legislature that you can support, because it's very important that whatever you feel about, this whole immigration thing, that we don't give our resources to it, that we do what we can at the local level, at the state level, to make sure we don't participate. Because as we've seen, there was this giant shift post 9/11 and another historical shift now where the only way they're going to get to the goal of deporting 1 million people is to take status away from a lot of people who already have it. So you heard about this case of the person with TPS. We're seeing temporary protected status. This is people who have been here for decades and cannot go back to those countries. That status being threatened. And other people who have status where it just becomes kind of irrelevant. They'll just detain you anyway, and good luck. Good luck getting a lawyer to defend yourself. Good luck, dealing with being in harsh detention conditions before you're, shipped away here and here and here and here. Good luck fighting your case. They are going to try to deport you first, ask questions later. We've seen people like our client, Rumeysa Ozturk, who is a student at Tufts University, and whose visa was taken away because of her speech. Now, we maintain that actually has nothing to do with immigration. She had perfectly legal status to be here, but because she co-wrote a piece in the Tufts Daily newspaper that criticized a policy of this administration, her visa was yanked away, and like her, so many others around the country. These are people who came here, legally, were studying, and whose visas were taken away because of things that they said. So not only is this government going after people who are undocumented, they're going after people who have legal status, but are either, for whatever reason, in their crosshairs because of something they have said, or simply to meet those numbers of the Stephen Miller quotas of 3,000 arrests every day. And so that is the world where we find ourselves now. The other way that they're doing it is by being extremely violent. So you've heard about a case of the car window being smashed in. You've seen those around the country. That is not something that we would see on a regular basis in the past. And they're recruiting and recruiting and recruiting people who are aligned with the vision of deportation. They have lowered their standards of professionalism, and we see just massive violations of human rights, massive violations of due process, and trying to meet those quotas by being just very violent about the way they go about it. And so due process is under attack, human rights are under attack, and it's all coming under this broad immigration strategy, but it is really much, much broader. First they came for the immigrants, right? That we all know that poem and we know how it ends, right? First they came for the immigrants, but that is not where this is going to end. If they're using immigration laws to go after free speech, that means you and that means me. And I just want to remind us of, our immigrant stories. I have an immigrant story. I came here in 1980 from Argentina. The way that I came is, I don't think that's a possibility nowadays. I don't think there are paths available to people the way that there were even in 1980. And if you go back further, maybe your parents, maybe your grandparents came. Think about how they were able to come to the United States and make a better life. Many of those paths are not available nowadays to people who are genuinely fleeing violence, economic devastation, and who just are trying to make a better life for themselves, but can't do so legally, and even when they do try, maybe that their status is getting taken away as well. So that's a little bit of the context of how we got here, and I do think that there is a role for the state of Massachusetts to play. We need to make sure that we legally prohibit the kind of collaboration agreements that we're seeing around the country. One very pervasive one is called a 287G agreement. It's a very silly name. It just has to do with the statute that it is under, but it's a 287G agreement. And what that is that they take normal police officers and deputize them with federal immigration powers. At the beginning of this year, there were 135 of those around the country, and now we are up to over 1,000. We had one here in Massachusetts. It was one person who sits at the Department of Corrections and does paperwork for ICE. Now there are 12 in New Hampshire. There was one in Maine that actually, there's this great town in Maine called Wells, Maine, where the town signed up for a 287G agreement, and the community was so outraged that they fought against it. They stood up, they rallied, and the town was forced to cancel it. So go Maine. Go Wells, Maine. We would like to, and the police chief said on the record that the reason that she was canceling is because she said policing and politics should never mix. They should never mix. I thought that I was doing something for my officers by giving them some extra training, but actually it's all politics. And so we want to make sure that we ban those agreements here in Massachusetts, that we don't see our cities and towns raising their hands to collaborate with ICE. And there's a lot that you can also do at the local level, and I will turn that to you.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Once again, Elsa Rincon from the Welcome Immigrant Network. And I want to take a second to say that I am so excited and privileged and lucky to be sitting alongside the two of you. I admire your work so much. So thank you, and thank you all for coming out. Right, at the local level. So at the Welcome Immigrant Network, we're a grassroots, all-volunteer nonprofit. We're based in Salem, and we provide research, education, and advocacy for our new Americans across the North Shore. And part of our approach is that immigration is one of the most natural human acts since the beginning of time. We've been migrating since we've been around, right? And as we become increasingly capitalist societies concerned with borders, right? It becomes riskier and more violent each time. But I want to talk a little bit about how we're seeing what's happening at the national level and at the state level play out in our local communities, and what I've been hearing from the local families that we've been supporting and working with. And what I wake up with every morning is with the thought that all of our families have every day is, imagine waking up every single morning and wondering if that day is going to be the day that your family is torn apart, right? This is what our families are grappling with every single day. And this is their daily reality for thousands of families across our communities, and especially over the past several months as we've witnessed the increased enforcement and the increased violent ways that these policies are being enforced across Massachusetts. So I want us to sort of ground us in the space to understand that there's a real human cost to these policies, in that they have ripple effects, that they're not just impacting the families or the individuals that are being detained, but they also touch our schools, our workplaces, our neighborhoods, in our whole communities, right? And it's not limited to to communities with high population of immigrants like Lawrence or Lynn. It's happening everywhere. One of my first calls to verified immigration enforcement was in the plaza in Rowley, which we wouldn't think has a large immigrant community. It doesn't have a large immigrant community, right? But not the place you would first think of immigration enforcement happening, right? And that this fear that's instilled in our community spreads, and it's paralyzing, right? You start to see parents not sending their kids to school, parents not wanting to take the risk and go out to work, impacting the financial health of the family, not going to doctor's appointments, impacting workplaces. The raid recently at the car wash where they had to shut down or decreased service because they pretty much lost their whole workforce, right? So we can see how that impacts local economies and the local institutions in our communities. I want to share some of the latest cases that of families that we've supported with. And one of the first one that comes to mind is a 16-year-old girl who called me on a Monday or Tuesday. Her father had been detained on Friday, but that Monday or Tuesday that she called me, they had no idea whether the father had been detained or not. He had left for work Friday morning, and never came back. The father was not able to contact family or an immigration attorney. And they happened to see on social media that there was a potential immigration detention on his route to work. So they figured, this is a possibility, let's call and have somebody check. When we checked that Tuesday in the system, we found him in Buffalo, New York already. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, he was already in Buffalo. So by the time we're coordinating, looking for an attorney, figuring out if there's a possibility to file for bond, to get him released, legal access, add funds so he could make phone calls, add funds so he could buy food at the canteen. 2 days later, he was already in Louisiana. Right? This father did end up, unfortunately, getting deported, and now the family has lost not only a parent figure, but also the breadwinner of the house, and you can imagine all the impacts that has. Another individual that we worked with recently was a 21-year-old college student at North Shore Community College who had a special juvenile visa status. So he had status, he was allowed to be here. He was driving his mom to work, was pulled over, no real traffic reason provided as to why he was pulled over and detained. So college student, working, living with mom, helping mom and sister out, right? Doing everything right with status. Ended up in Burlington for a few days, ultimately transferred to Buffalo, New York as well. Luckily, this individual, we were able to support their release on bond while their immigration case is ongoing. And some of the ways we had to do that was collaborating with our local organizations in rallying our elected officials. So we have the chief of police of that town, the mayor of that town. We contacted our congressmen and senators and state reps, had them make phone calls directly to Burlington, write letters for their bond hearing, and really exerting that political pressure, like, hey, we're watching this case, right? And ultimately, he was released because he had all the rights to be here. He had followed all the law and was following the rules. So that was one of the successful story of the community coming together and exerting that pressure for a neighbor. Another case, I was actually on a phone call yesterday with school officials from one of our local towns with a mom whose husband is currently in detention. And this story is an example of how like your whole life is turned upside down by this disruption, right? So the husband brought the child to school, picked up the child and provided after school care, provided financially to the home, right? Was an active parent participating in this child's life, and all of this has been disrupted by this immigration enforcement detention. So now the mother has to reconfigure her whole life, right? Her scheduled for work doesn't permit her to drop off child at school, so that she quit her job in order to bring child to school. Can she find somebody else to do that? So like those little things that for us are just like not big deals, like become really important decisions for a family to be thinking about.
Thank you, Elsabelle. So maybe we could have some questions from the audience. Somebody has a mic.
We have a mic over here if you want to come up and stand at the mic. You can make a line so that everybody can have their questions answered.
Thank you all for these incredibly moving stories.
I just
for
had a
everything you're
question
doing.
for you, Laura. I had a question about abandonment. The idea that a U.S. citizen could be taken by ICE or something like that. Has that happened?
It definitely has happened, yeah. I mean, we've talked about, migrants or immigrants who currently had status and were still detained, but yeah, across the nation, we've seen stories of U.S. citizens being detained. And again, I think that this just highlights the fact that it's not just that they're coming for immigrants, right? It's just anybody who looks a particular way, speaks a particular way, even works at a certain location, right? I think that that's, kind of alluding to the Supreme Court case that came out a couple months ago, maybe now. But yeah, it's not about, also I think this kind of highlights the lie really about immigrants being criminals, right? And how supposedly this huge surge in ICE enforcement is to bring down crime and, arrest criminals and whatnot, but we know that that's not the case. I mean, the majority of people who are being detained right now don't have any criminal background, don't have any, criminal charges in the past, including my clients. They've never had any criminal cases against them, yet they were being placed in detention.
Yeah, and I can add, it's not totally new. This has happened before, but what it was before is it was a mistake, right? And we could usually find those people and get them out, and maybe there was a lawsuit for damages later. Mistakes would happen, but I think when you're ramping up the number of people you're detaining every day, you're going to be less deliberate about who you're picking up, and that is what we're seeing. In Los Angeles, there was the lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court about how they're just rounding up people who are brown or black, are driving a work vehicle or in a certain neighborhood, and that is enough suspicion for ICE to grab them. It is still illegal for ICE to deport a U.S. citizen. Let's be clear. I mean, talking about what our rights are, the law has not changed. What's changed is how quickly they're grabbing people, the indiscriminate nature, and how hard it is to fight back with just the sheer numbers, right? The law is still the law. We would absolutely maintain that.
If I could just quickly add from my academic hat on how you were talking about the creation of the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11 and how those policies are organized at the federal level shape the narrative at the local level, right? Department of Homeland Security, 9/11, fighting terrorism, and right, and then who are the targets of that? immigrants, right? And how do we connect terrorism and terrorist acts to immigrants and profiling people? Before that, it was under the Department of Justice, but even before that, it was under the Department of Labor, and for a short period of time under the Department of Treasury. So we can see how the federal departments that are overseeing immigration, right, have different assumptions we can carry about how immigrants are perceived, and therefore how the policies and laws are applied at the local level.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Yes, I have a question. It has to do with something that I'm very concerned about for the present and for the future. So I'd like you to address what role Seth Moulton is taking proactively and a leadership role in stopping ICE, the illegal actions. About the, was it 287G? So what is he doing proactively and as a leader
I do want to steer us a little bit away from political candidates, because I think this is going to be a very controversial race. And but if to the specific questions that she's asked, if any of you want to answer that in particular.
I can say at a local level, we've had generally a good response from most of our elected officials in terms of supporting individual families and cases when we reach out to them. So that's what I'll say.
And I think our congressional delegation is very supportive. They can always do more, and it is up to us to keep calling them and demanding that they stand up for what is right. In terms of 287G, we are really looking at the state legislature to act on that one, because it's a federal program, it's under federal statute. Yes, Congress could change it, but realistically, they're not going to do that now. But our state legislature can absolutely act to make sure we ban those here, as in fact 7 other states have done. 7 other states, Delaware was just the latest one to do it, to just place an all-out ban on 287G agreements, and that is something that is within the state power to do.
So people could talk to their state legislators.
Absolutely.
That would be the
And we have
way to go.
postcards up there. We have ways for you to contact your state legislator.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you all very much for all the work that you're doing, for being here tonight. My question is simply, if you happen to know an individual who's been detained by ICE, what can you do to help that individual? Are there different steps that you can take that would help them?
So at a local level, I'll backtrack a little bit. If you happen to see immigration enforcement activity driving to work in your neighborhood, wherever you may be, one of the newest resources across the state is the LUCE statewide network. So we've launched a statewide hotline you can call and say, I see ICE agents, or I see agents with vests, or whatever it is that you witnessed, to that hotline. We will then send out our local volunteers to verify that enforcement activity. It helps to remind the individuals engaging with those agents of their rights, right? We talked about the constitutional rights we talked about, but we can also document and record and be able to have that interaction in case there are any rights violations. It may help the individual in the future with the legal case. So that's one thing we can do. Here in the North Shore, if you happen to know of an individual who's been detained, we are one of the local resources. So the Welcome Immigrant Network is one of the organizations that is part of the LUCE network. The LUCE network was put together by organizations across the state. We came together and launched this statewide network, but is supported locally by local organizations. So the Welcome Immigrant Network is the anchoring organization in the North Shore. So you may contact LUCE directly, or you may contact us directly, and we can support family members of the individual being detained and locating the individual, connecting them with legal resources, representation. We have a mutual aid fund where we support paying for legal fees, or for rent for that month, or food, or whatever the need may need as they are navigating this very complex and difficult process. And connecting with all our other coalition members and resources along the community so that their needs are being met. So that is one thing you can do, is call LUCE, call WIN, and then we can take it from there and support families.
Can any one of us film something that's happening that we find suspicious relative to that?
Yeah, we all have the right to film a federal interaction. I believe the law is still that federal agents still have to identify themselves and what agency they're with. We do have trainings for our volunteers on how to do that, how to approach an agent, what kind of questions to ask, and how to do that safely for you and for the individuals being potentially detained.
Are you recruiting more volunteers?
We are. Hotline, ICE verifiers, court accompaniment, etc.
Thank you. Another question?
Hi, just want to say thank you, all of you, for what you're doing. I have a question that I've been puzzling over myself for a while, which is, we say that, or on the cards that you have, for instance, Elsabel, you have, it says people have the right to not say a word. But then there's stories presented where someone, for instance, someone asks, where are you from? And someone answers, right? But also, I guess I'm not saying this well, but how do you have that person present their ID or without saying anything? You know, this is what is a good response for someone? Yes, and then I would just add to the earlier piece, which was, I don't know what his name, Tom, whatever his name is, who said, we're picking people up because of how they look. And I just want to say that out loud. That's been quoted many times, and that is, you know, just this unfortunate reality.
The head of Homeland Security.
Yes.
Who was the director here in Boston. So.
Oh, that's right.
Anybody want to answer that question?
Well, I can start with the Know Your Rights question. So when we teach Know Your Rights, we like to teach them in a very interactive workshop where we get to do role plays, where people get to become more familiar with the language that they might want to use. And we always make sure that people feel empowered to make the decision for themselves in the moment. There is no right or wrong way to handle that situation. It's going to be up to you, and it's going to be based on a variety of factors that will only come into play in that very moment. But we do teach people what their rights are. For example, your right to remain silent. You do, for example, have an obligation to show your license if you're pulled over, for example. If you are over 18 and have immigration status, you have to carry those papers. But we teach all of that in the workshop so that people both understand what their rights and responsibilities are and kind of get comfortable with how they might answer that question. It's going to be different for everybody, so there's no one answer to that one question that you're answering, but we have the cards and we give them out, but we much prefer to do it in a very interactive workshop where people get to ask all those questions about their very specific situation and how they would handle it.
Thank you. We have another question?
Hello. I'd like to also thank you all very much for what you're doing. Your work is so important. I actually would like to share two pieces of information, if I could, before I ask a question. The first one is, and maybe everybody knows this, but I think it's worth mentioning, that simply being undocumented in America is a misdemeanor. A lot of people say, they're criminals. It is not a criminal penalty. It's a offense. It is a misdemeanor. And I just think that's worth for people to know. The other thing is something I found out a few months ago that I found very disturbing, is that the acting director of ICE at the federal level, one of the people behind the scenes pulling the strings on what we are seeing happening on our streets today, the terrible brutality and lawlessness, has a home in West Newbury. His name is Todd Lyons, and he is here in Massachusetts. Obviously, he's in DC doing what he's doing, but I think we all ought to know that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And my question is, back in March when I saw the first video of an immigrant couple's car window being bashed in, was absolutely horrified, thought this was some outlier, I called the Beverly police, I live in Beverly, and asked them, what should I do if I ever saw something like that happen? And they said, the person I spoke with said, I said, should I call the Beverly Police? And he said, no, there's nothing we can do. And I found that deeply disturbing. And I said, these people were not identified. He said, they're federal agents. We do not have jurisdiction. I said, but they had masks on. They were not showing their badges. For all anybody knew, they were criminals trying to kidnap them. The Beverly Police can do nothing about this. And he said, there's nothing we can do. I would like to hear responses to that because that really bothers me.
Thank you. A quick response, because we have some more people waiting to ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult situation, right? I mean, police officers are there to protect the public safety and the public good, but yeah, immigration is a federal, jurisdiction. And so I think what I was pointing to earlier, that for allies, right, it's really important, well, if you are witnessing that, record it, right? Record it. Have it be evidence if this person or, this couple later on wants to move forward with filing a civil complaint, a civil rights complaint. And that's going to be really useful evidence for them to use in that case. That's definitely one thing that people can do and feel more proactive.
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation to be in for that police officer, for that police chief, knowing that there are federal agents that they can't control in their city. That said, I do think there are things that police departments can do. And we have seen dozens and dozens of police departments around the state do this, is to have a really clear policy about when they will and won't collaborate with ICE. And I think that helps kind of diffuse that confusion among residents that, like, if I call 911, will they, send ICE? If I get pulled over, will ICE be right behind them? And so we've seen dozens of municipalities pass trust acts or ordinances or even police policies that say, this is what we will do and this is what we won't do. And if Beverly doesn't have one of those and you'd like to work on one, I'm happy to give you a model policy. We can help walk you through what other cities and towns have done around the country. But it is true. And I think, I don't know if it was you, but somebody else asked about whether you need a judicial warrant. ICE does not actually need a judicial warrant to arrest somebody on the street. They need a judicial warrant to enter your home without your consent. That's something that we teach at Know Your Rights all the time, to look for that judicial warrant. But when they're out on the street, they can arrest people for immigration violations without a judicial warrant. And so even though Luce verifiers know when to ask, it's not like they're going to show you their warrant, right? If they don't have one, it may not stop them from arresting a person.
Thank you. Could we have the next questioner, please?
Thank you. Hi. Thank you to the Cabinet, and thank you all. And my question is there, through the ACLU or any other initiative, to stop the masking of ICE? And my second question is, on the 287G, would it be possible for a community, say a small community that's town meeting, that they could decide their own home rule?
Absolutely. You don't even need a home rule for that one. Some of these ordinances I was talking about specifically say we will never join a 287G or similar contract. You can absolutely do that through town meeting, through a town warrant. You can do that through the city council or select board, whatever your town or city has. So that is something that we've seen and can absolutely be done. The masking thing is also tough because neither the state legislature nor a locality has the authority to tell a federal agent how to do their jobs. But I think it's really important that we as citizens, as residents, as community members, continue to raise our voice about this because it is terrifying. It is terrifying. And, again, it's the tip of the iceberg. This is, or a slippery slope, whatever metaphor you want to use, when we allow the people that our tax money goes to fund, right? These are public servants. If we stand silent and we say nothing about the masking, about the violence, then we've lost, right? So I think whether the legislature can do it, that's tricky, but I think we need to continue to speak up and say, this is not okay. I'm sorry, I jumped in on that one.
No,
I agree. And I mean, I think that this is why the families who are stepping forward and taking further legal action after this has happened is going to be really important. Legally, there isn't a lot of ways to hold a federal official accountable for something like what we've seen in the news. There used to be something called Bivens claims. They're basically dead. They're not really something that people can really seek anymore. And so there's really only one narrow way to, at least that seems viable. And so that's kind of what Lawyers for Civil Rights in moving these cases forward is doing. And the goal is, one, to hopefully get something to compensate the family for what they've experienced, but also it's putting pressure on the officials, right? Holding the agency accountable for this unlawful conduct. And hopefully, you know, that will create a domino effect, and, you know, people will continue to file these types of lawsuits across the nation, and that'll have a larger impact, hopefully, on officers' behaviors.
I just want to quickly reinforce and appreciate those of you that have shared, you've called your chief of police or your elected officials, because that's really what it takes at the local level. For us not to wait for our elected officials to be proactive and take leadership, but for us to continuously have that line of communication open and say, as your constituent, this is what we're expecting from you. This is what our community needs, right? To be treated with dignity, safety for everybody. And we're watching and we're willing to work with you to make that happen. And we've consulted with Laura and ACLU on talking with mayors and chief of police around this region, specifically around this Trust Act policies.
And what you're hearing, I think, from all of us tonight is what we say at rallies. When we fight, we win. They're not as strong as they say they are. So whenever a community gets together and puts pressure on the government to release one person, guess what? They get released, right? When a bunch of lawyers get together and sue on behalf of a family or on behalf of a person who's detained, we're winning, so we need to keep going.
I think we have another questioner. Hi.
Hello, my name is Lena Sedano. I'm in 3rd grade. Wow, this is my first time on the mic. It sounds so weird. First, I want to thank you for knowledge. My parents always say to me that knowledge is key. So, thank you. Anyways, my question is, I know this is for adults mostly, but what can I do since I can't vote yet? Or other ways to help my community?
I love this question, and I think you're doing the most powerful and important thing you could do is by being here tonight and getting that knowledge, because that is the first step for all of us, is to educate ourselves and learn. But then you have an even bigger responsibility after that, because what do you do with that knowledge once you get it? Our responsibility is to share it. So share it with your friends and your family, what you learn about tonight, the organizations, and that's one of the biggest and most important acts you can do.
Thank you.
And if I can add that I'm going to put a lot of pressure on you, because your generation is amazing. And part of the reason we're in this mess is because there's a lack of kindness from our generations over here. So I want to make sure that you take that knowledge and that you continue to show kindness to your friends who are maybe immigrants, who have families that have immigrants in them, to ask them if they need anything, to ask them how you can support them, and to continue to talk about how we are all in this together. So thank you.
I see a future leader of the country maybe over there. Anyone else have a question?
That was a hard act to follow. I would have chosen anything but to be next. In any event, I'm sorry I didn't catch everybody's name, but I heard mention of the state legislature with respect to the 287G agreements. That's part of the Safe Communities Act, which I understand has sat in the legislature for somewhere between 8 and 10 years. And so I have grave concerns about how we are going to launch a campaign to to get the state legislature to move on anything. And what I keep hearing, not just from the legislature, but also from our governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, is, and I'll now move to masking and the right that we have for officials to, I'm blanking on words, but to wear identification so we know who they are. They're not in unmarked vehicles. They're not masked. And I keep hearing from our state legislatures, not just our state legislatures, I'm sorry, our governor, our lieutenant governor, our JAG's office, that they're not going to address this because they don't believe that they can, in litigation, prevail. And that goes back to the supremacy clause, this notion that, that the feds have jurisdiction over state rights. So I'm grossly concerned about what's happening within our legislature and also what's happening within our elected officials at the highest levels.
Thank you very much. Did you have a question there too?
My question is, where do we go from here?
How are we going to do this?
I have concerns, but I presume there's a plan. I don't know what
I
it
am
is.
so glad you asked that question. Thank you so much for asking that. I couldn't agree with you more. I was part of the team that first filed the Safe Communities Act when it was called the Trust Act in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
It's neither here nor there. Here's the thing. 287G has been around for a very long time, but it's become much more urgent now that we went from 135 to over 1,000 in this year alone. It is part of the Safe Communities Act. It's also part of at least 2 other bills. So it's out there. Legislators are getting used to this idea. 7 states have banned those agreements. None of those have been overturned, so that is not at all a concern. It's absolutely within our right to say we're not going to do this. And I think we just have to pressure this legislature that, typically moves slow. We have a very old legislature. We have, a 2-year session. It's very slow. When we passed the driver's license bill, it took us 20 years. We passed it, but it took us 20 years. So I'm not fazed by how long it's been out there, but I do think that the time is now. And what we've done is, there's a fact sheet back there, we have a brand new coalition called Protecting Massachusetts Communities. And it's got a lot of the organizations that you know and love, a lot of new ones, a lot of labor leaders are part of it, so the Mass Teachers Association, SEIU, a lot of new organizations have joined. And what we did is we distilled the pieces of all those bills that are floating around that we think are just really the most urgent. 287G is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the informal collaboration that we're seeing in some cities and states, cities and towns that are just deciding to, help out, assist ICE in a civil immigration arrest. We don't think we should be doing that. So we're asking the legislature to focus on that. And as you may have seen, the legislature did put in $5 million for legal assistance.
Mhm.
We want that to become a permanent
Yes.
law. So these are the 3 top priorities that this new group has
Mhm.
coalesced around. We have a lot of energy. In fact, we have a hearing on the 25th
Yep.
of November, so coming up. If you'd like to testify to any of this, please let my colleague Molly or me know. We'd love to get you some talking points. We really need to turn up the pressure on the legislature. They're going to hear all of those bills on that one day.
If you could just answer why neither our governor, lieutenant governor, or state AG are willing to follow Governor Newsom's example and tackle the no masking and the requirement of identification. All I understand is that they're not tackling it because they don't believe they can win in litigation because of the supremacy clause. And yet I see California moving forward and saying, yes, this will have to be litigated, but why have California stand alone? Why not have every blue state governor and AG get behind Newsom, who is fighting this?
I would urge you to call them and ask. I can't answer that for them, but I would urge you to call and ask that question.
Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, we still have some more people. Please ask.
Hi. Oops. Again, I'd like to thank you all for being here.
We're waiting to hear you sing as you're kind of
Yeah, sort of Frank Sinatra stuff, right? And also the people who are here, I'm glad to see so many people here. Of course, I also see a lot of empty seats. So I'm always concerned that people aren't paying attention. These people are here, but we need to get other people out as well to listen to this and understand it. But I do have a question. This guy in the White House, he has occasionally threatened the Insurrection Act, and that could take it to the next level. We've already heard that people are saying, the government isn't doing much. You folks are doing what you can. What happens then? Are we preparing anything for that, for an Insurrection Act being implemented?
Who's going to talk about insurrection? I do think that there's sort of a related question that I have too, which is for people who are doing rallies, holding signs on the street corner, what do they need to be worried about and what are their protections?
Well, I can start with one of the things that we have in Trump too is that they told us their game plan, right? So we all read Project 2025. We all read everything that came out of Stephen Miller's mouth. We read everything. And so we had a chance to do some legal research, to make sure we have enough staff, make sure we have enough funding for our staff. So we know what's coming. We know what they have threatened. The brilliant minds writing legal briefs are certainly aware and thinking about all of this. But it's really going to take all of us. And that goes back to, it's not just going to be a lawsuit, right? It's not just going to be going to the Supreme Court and getting that shut down. It's going to take all of us out on the streets supporting those lawsuits, supporting whatever legal action comes next. So if you were at No Kings a few weeks ago, you hopefully had a really fantastic experience, like 7 million people did across the country. 7 million people, no violence, right? No Insurrection Act, no National Guard in Boston. We had an amazing turnout around the country and really showed what nonviolent resistance looks like. And we have to keep that pressure up. If you read any history about how to topple a dictator, that's how it's done. It's going to be in the courts and in the streets. So I urge all of you to participate.
I was going to add, just like we do with families at risk of deportation, creating safety plans and family preparedness plans. Also, we do safety plans for people going out on the streets and protesting and holding signs. So at an individual level, have a plan. And if you need help, these agencies have put out some great literature and recommendations, and those are the ones we use at the local level with our groups as well. So.
Trish, we have 2 more questions.
Thank you.
Hi, I actually have 2 questions.
Go ahead.
Thank you for all the information that you're giving here. My first question is, can we at a local level organize as a community and ask our police department to implement the no mask in our town? And the second is, where do you do the training that you guys offer and how long does it take?
So just to clarify, you're asking if local police departments can implement a policy where police officers don't wear masks?
No, if like the whole community, if we get like say like the entire town to sign a petition and bring it to the police department, to the police chief, can we pressure them into implementing no mask in our town?
For federal agents.
For federal agents, you're asking?
Yes, for federal agents.
I mean, I think that this kind of goes back to an earlier point. It can be kind of tricky just because there is this, immigration is a federal issue, so it is difficult to get any policy or really any way to dictate the way that they're going to behave. I mean, they have policies where this is already supposed to be, right, the way that they function. They're supposed to tell you that they come from a specific agency and they're supposed to identify themselves, give their badge number and all that. The thing is that they're supposed, like, who's implementing that or who's overseeing that, right? Like, that they're making sure that they're following their own rules. If we're expecting them to police themselves, well, we know that that often doesn't lead to anywhere, right? And so, again, I think it's about organizing and communities organizing together to make sure we put pressure and making sure that, they know, officers know, immigration officers know that that's not something that is going to be allowed to stand. And your second question was, sorry?
The training.
About local trainings. I'll just quickly also add, as an activist and community organizer, that a purposeful demand, I think, is appropriate to go to elected officials or community leaders and say, this is, as a community, what we want and what would make us feel safer. So I see the value in you asking the question of going to the police chief and say, this is what we expect enforcement to look like in our town. So even if from a legal standpoint, nothing can be done, at least we're delivering that message. So again, I just want to say I see the value in that, and we have had groups who have done that across different cities in the North Shore, Salem, Lynn, and some other towns. So if you want to talk more about that, we can chat after. I can plug you into whatever city or town you live in with the local activists there. In terms of the trainings, I would suggest you follow the Luce Network social media and the WIN, or Welcome Immigrant Network social media. We're always posting training opportunities on there, but also the flyers in the back have a QR code where you can sign up, and we'll let you know when the next training dates are coming up. So right now we're doing virtual trainings and in-person trainings across the state. And I believe there is one coming up soon in the North Shore and Peabody, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. But the best way to do that is to go online and sign up, and it will let you know. Anybody else who's interested.
Thank you very much. Great question.
Yeah. And I do want to add just one more thing, which Laura had kind of, highlighted, is the fact that maybe we can't have policies or laws, right, that require federal officials to not wear masks, but you can pressure the police department to not cooperate with ICE, right? And to not, so that there's less information sharing and things like that. I think that that's really important. That's something that communities, again, should really be organizing and moving forward with.
Yeah. I'll quickly share that we had ICE agents and vehicles using parking lots of local police stations of towns across Essex County. And after our network went to those police departments and said, this is an issue and this is why we're concerned, it stopped, so it definitely works.
I think that's a great idea. And I would just add, and this will be our last question, I think a lot of police... Excuse me?
Yeah, we're going to take 2 more questions.
Okay, great. I think a lot of police... I think a lot of police departments around the country in Massachusetts have worked very hard to support the community, to remove the kind of us versus them mentality that has sometimes developed in police departments. And I think this is really important to let them know, let your local police department know that you care about this. They're in a pretty bad place. But if they had some more community support about this, all of these issues, I think that it would be helpful to them, actually.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Mine's a pretty quick nuts and bolts question. Up in my community in Gloucester, there has been a request to go down to the ICE facility in Burlington and protest. And I've been doing that. And it's a wonderful feeling. And sometimes it feels a little like shutting the barn door after the horse has gotten out to be at the ICE facility protesting when there's so much leading up to it beforehand. And I'm just wondering if you can give me a sense of effectiveness about going down there, and it's the tail end of everything going on that you're talking about. So feedback on that, please. Protesting at ICE.
I just want to shout out Gloucester has been one of the most active Luce verifier hubs in Essex County, so shout out to Gloucester. As my colleagues have said, going out into the streets and making our voices heard and making our presence known and being seen, it works. That's the way we resist. So being at Burlington, it does have power, it does have influence. And around specific cases, right? You all might have seen the Blanca campaign several weeks ago. That was a hugely successful campaign where Blanca, who's a Salem resident from Honduras, orphaned, with a physical disability, and her legal case just had hit a wall. And because we were out there protesting for Blanca and letting the administration know and the ICE officers know, this is not just about Blanca, this is about our whole community, she was granted a 1-year extension, which buys us time to revisit her legal case and avenues and whatnot. But had we not shown up, I guarantee you that Blanca would have been in Honduras right now, and her life would have been at risk. Right? So this is the power of showing up. And every week there are families walking into that building who are supported, whether you know it or not, right? Because we are out there, because you are out there. So it absolutely makes a difference.
Thank you. Did we have one last question?
Just a really quick one.
Sure.
Is it misguided patriotism or is it the money? How much does an ICE agent get for each person or group or family? What is the why? And that's it.
That I'm not sure, but
I don't know about the salaries, but I can tell you this. Part of the $170 billion is new incentives for local police to sign up through this 287G program, which includes what I call a bounty bonus. So it includes, for the first time ever, complete reimbursement of what the police officer's time for signing up for this program, and a bonus for locating a high percentage of the people that they give you to locate. So $1,000 quarterly for, I think, hitting 90% of the list that they give police officers. I believe that goes to the police officers themselves, not just to the department. It's a bounty. And now there's some reporting around offering bounties to individuals who are not police officers.
Are most of them police officers, the ICE agents?
So they are federal officers.
Yeah.
They work for ICE, so they're federal law enforcement officers. But now, under this program, they're deputizing local police who are out there just doing their regular daily work out on the street, but also wearing this other hat as an ICE agent. And if they locate a high number of people, they get a bonus, right? And so that, I think, is really, really troubling. That we're not talking about just like, you know, a law enforcement entity. We're talking about individuals who are signing up for the money.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that there was news of ICE officers getting a $50K bonus if they initially signed up. So, I mean, that might be part of it, but.
I was going to add from the researcher academic hat that this is not new. Immigrants have been persecuted for as long as the United States has been the United States. And the same anti-immigrant rhetoric we see today, we saw 100 years ago against Irish, Polish, Italian immigrants. We saw even before that. This is the fourth wave of migration, not to get too academic, but the game plan has been the same. This time it just has been more overt, aggressive, and violent than in previous waves of migration, but it's not new.
Thank you. I'd really like to thank this panel for an incredibly informative session. I'd like to thank all of you for your support, participation, great questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Therese from Leading Ladies.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. Please visit the tables in the back. Our panelists have talked about a lot of really valuable information that you can pick up there. And we're in this together. So thank you so much for being here. Good night.